My name is Ava, and I am 34 years old. I live with my husband James, and we both work for the company founded by my father-in-law. Although he is now retired, my father-in-law single-handedly transformed a small construction firm into an enterprise generating $250 billion in annual revenue. He even acquired rival companies, and while his methods could be forceful, everyone admired his remarkable business acumen. James, chosen to follow in his father's footsteps, was raised in a pampered environment and possesses a gentle nature. However, I fear his gentleness isn't suited for the cutthroat world of business. While gentle may sound pleasant, in reality, he is incredibly indecisive. I've started to doubt his suitability as a husband, let alone a CEO. James himself has admitted, "I'm not cut out to be a CEO. I'll probably just be a figurehead if I become one. It's easier for me that way." His lack of serious intention to take over the company has left me frustrated after 5 years of marriage. In stark contrast to James, I consider myself quite decisive. During his active years, my father-in-law appreciated this quality in me and entrusted me with various tasks. Before marrying James, I worked at a bank where I managed finances and always kept numbers in mind. I planned to become a full-time homemaker after our wedding, but my father-in-law requested that I join the construction company instead. Soon after I started working there, he began inviting me to board meetings and seeking my opinions on management matters. Initially, the board members were skeptical about including the founder's daughter-in-law in such important discussions. However, as I consistently offered valuable insights, they began to listen to my suggestions. Despite James being a board member, he rarely attended meetings, and this was accepted as the norm by the board and my father-in-law. One day, after returning home from a meeting, I found James nonchalantly watching TV. "Why didn't you attend today's meeting?" I asked angrily. "You're a key member, you should take it seriously." Without showing any remorse, he retorted, "Even if I attend, I don't really understand the discussions. Besides, the board members prefer you, so there's no problem, right?" I wondered if he was irritated by my participation in the board meetings. Despite his remarks, my father-in-law had been teaching me the intricacies of running the business and seemed to be grooming me as his successor. I had started enjoying my involvement in management, and before I knew it, I was working hard to meet my father-in-law's expectations. About 2 years after I started attending meetings, my father-in-law retired completely. Whenever there were major decisions to be made, the board members would consult me while James was sidelined. I had hoped that being in such a situation would spur James to work harder, but instead, he became even more disengaged from his work. Although he would come to the office in the morning, he would disappear somewhere by noon and stay home for the rest of the day. When he saw me at home, he wouldn't talk about work at all, seemingly indifferent to the company's affairs. Meanwhile, my workload at the company was increasing, and I was getting busier. After my father-in-law's retirement, the board members relied on me more and more, and I was tasked with duties akin to those of a CEO. Given that we were a large company with many employees, I was committed to increasing sales and profits for the sake of our workers. With the hard work of our employees, our sales began to grow. I found running the company more interesting and became more engrossed in my work. Conversely, my husband James seemed to be losing interest in his work, and his appearances at the company began to diminish. The conversations between us at home lessened, and our relationship became increasingly tense. Around that time, our lives took a different turn. James came home and casually mentioned, "I ran into your sister Megan today and we had lunch together." Megan, 2 years older than me, had just divorced about 6 months ago due to her infidelity. This led to a big commotion when her enraged husband stormed our parents' home. My husband James went to my parents' house to calm down Megan's husband in my place as I was busy with work. With his gentle upbringing and calming personality, James managed to convince Megan's furious husband to leave for the time being. Later, Megan told me, "Your husband is really something. He handled my raging husband so effortlessly." She praised James. Megan's husband, in his anger, must have been disarmed by James' calm and easygoing demeanor. Megan was able to divorce her husband after paying alimony, but since this incident, she seemed to look at James differently. Until then, she had thought of James, who was not particularly attractive and quite indecisive, as just a rich, pampered son. After the incident, she seemed to believe he was a respectable business owner. Now single after her divorce, Megan probably saw James as a great catch, given her love for wealthy men. However, I, engrossed in work, couldn't imagine such a thing. Of course, my sister wouldn't have known that James is just a nominal executive who doesn't actually manage the company. Megan's ex-husband was an elite employee of a foreign company. At their wedding, she had bragged to me, "My husband is an excellent employee with a high salary, and on top of that, he's handsome. You're jealous, aren't you?" Her ex-husband was handsome, smart, and carried a stylish vibe. I couldn't understand why she would cheat on such a wonderful husband. 3 months after hearing from James that he had lunch with Megan, I returned home to find James unusually serious. "I have something to discuss," he said. It was the first time I had heard such words from him, and I had a bad premonition. With my heart pounding, I waited for him to speak. "Actually, Megan is pregnant with my child, and I want a divorce." I was shocked by the request for a divorce, but even more surprised to hear that Megan was pregnant. At a loss for words, I listened as James continued. "Megan is planning to come over on our next day off to discuss this, so I'm counting on you." Stunned, I asked, "So you want to marry my sister?" With a troubled look, James responded, "It's not that I want to marry her, but if she's having my baby, I guess I have no choice." I sighed at James' typical indecisiveness and replied, "Well, if she's carrying your baby, I suppose it can't be helped. Let's discuss this when she comes over." It seemed like my husband and I couldn't make any decisions together, so I decided to meet directly with my sister to figure things out. Even though I had already made up my mind to divorce, I thought I needed to consult my father-in-law about the company's situation. As the daughter-in-law of the founder, I was involved in running the business, but if I divorced, I would become a stranger. The next day, I went to my in-laws' house and told my father-in-law exactly what my husband had said. My mother-in-law, who was present, was thrilled at the news of her son having a child, but quickly quieted down when glared at by my father-in-law. She seemed more concerned about her grandchild than the company's management. After some thought, my father-in-law said with a smile, "Ava, I want you to continue to be involved in the company's management as you have been. I don't care about James. I'll take the responsibility, so let him do what he likes." It seemed that my father-in-law valued the management of the company more than his son or grandchild. Even though he had retired, he still had a strong voice in the company, and since he held most of the company's shares, no executives would go against his will. I was also interested in my work and reluctant to give it up now. With my job settled, it was time to discuss the future with my sister. On my day off, my sister came to my house with a big smile. "Ava, it's a pity you couldn't have a baby. I'll give you plenty of consolation money. Please leave this house immediately," she said with a triumphant air. My husband sat silently, listening to our conversation without saying anything despite being the one who caused the problem. I was appalled at his indifferent face. "It's okay to get divorced," I said, "but there's also the issue of alimony and division of property. Let's bring in a lawyer and decide properly." "I never thought you, my sister, would fall for a man like James," I retorted to my sister with irony. She glared at me with a stern face for a moment, but quickly regained her composure. I finally realized that it's not about looks in men, it's about what's inside. It was funny to hear my sister talk as if she fully understood my husband's inner self. Holding back my laughter, I replied, "That's great, isn't it? From now on, live happily with James." The inner self my sister was talking about was likely money. She seemed to be under the impression that my husband was the president of my father-in-law's company, but it didn't seem like she had heard anything from him. When the discussion was over, my sister said she would start living here and brought a moving company. Though I only took out the necessary items, knowing my quick-tempered sister, I had already arranged for a new apartment. I also hired a lawyer and had documents prepared for the division of property and claims for alimony. The next day, after moving out my belongings, I started negotiations for alimony and division of property with my husband and sister, accompanied by my lawyer. My husband was still present that day, sitting with an indifferent face, and only my sister was speaking. "As I said before, I'm willing to pay as much alimony as you want, so please decide at your convenience." Hearing my sister's words, my lawyer decided to also claim alimony against my sister in addition to my husband. My sister was still paying alimony in installments to her ex-husband, so my lawyer had said in advance that it might be impossible to claim alimony from her. But since she said she would pay me as much as I wanted, I decided to make a claim. When it came to negotiations about the division of property, my sister excitedly said, This mansion is originally James's family's, so it shouldn't be part of the division of property, right? The lawyer answered my sister emotionlessly. This building and the land belong to the company, so it's up to the company to decide. Even my husband seemed surprised by this. Is that so? I thought this house was Dad's, he said casually. My sister, on the other hand, was taken aback and attacked the lawyer. Wait a minute, so does that mean I can't live in this house? The lawyer responded in a businesslike manner. Since it's company property, you can continue to live here if the company allows it. At this comment, my sister seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. Oh, you should have said that earlier. It'll be fine since James, the president, will be living here. The lawyer looked surprised for a moment, then burst into laughter. What are you talking about? Ava is the president, not James. Seeing my sister, who was planning to remarry my husband yet didn't even know that fact, made me laugh. My sister immediately turned to my husband and yelled, "Ha, James, you're not the president." I stepped in for my husband, who looked troubled, and explained to my sister, James is merely an advisor without any executive rights. I'm an executive director, but I was also made president. Our father-in-law, the founder, had always been the president, but when he retired, he made me an executive director and president. The other executives appreciated my performance, so there was no opposition. On the other hand, my husband, thanks to his father's arrangement, was receiving an executive salary as an advisor without executive rights, which is more of a pity than a mere employee. Even though it's called an executive salary, since he wasn't really doing any work, it was less than what an ordinary employee would get. So, I was bearing all the living expenses. James, who didn't care about our household finances, didn't even bother to know whether the house he was living in was company-owned or belonged to his father. Although our home was company-owned, my responsible father-in-law had always charged me rent. I thought of it as a normal rental property. The lawyer, still laughing, asked me, can we continue to rent this house to James? My sister reacted to the rent part of the lawyer's question. What do you mean by rent? Are you suggesting that I take rent from James? Isn't it the company's property? Just make it free. The lawyer presented the rent amount, laughing heartily at her words. She was shocked to see the figure, and so was James, who seemed to be hearing about it for the first time. Guess a house this big does have a high rent, he muttered. I can't afford that with my salary, James admitted, realizing his executive compensation would barely leave any money after paying the rent. Covering their living expenses would be hard. Over the 5 years of our marriage, James had used up all his modest executive compensation. My salary also disappeared in high rent and living expenses, leaving hardly any assets. Splitting the savings was the only option for asset division. After the lawyer left, my sister, now aware that the mansion she had hoped for was actually rented, seemed utterly deflated, staring blankly. James was grinning as usual. I suggested, why don't we vacate this place and go back to your parents' house? Your mother was so happy about the pregnancy news. James agreed, but I laughed at the thought of why I had to consider this man, who was about to be my ex, this much. I started worrying whether this unreliable man could raise a child, but I decided to leave it as it was none of my business. I asked my sister, who seemed to have forgotten about her own alimony, are you okay with the alimony payment, sis? You seem pretty confident, but you're also paying your ex-husband, right? She was stunned to hear this, her face suddenly snapping back to reality. Alimony, I have to pay it too. She was astonished, seemingly having heard nothing of the earlier discussion. You said, I'll give plenty of alimony, but you weren't expecting me to pay it, right? My salary is really low. James and my sister exchanged surprised glances. Though not a lawyer, watching these two made me want to burst into laughter. I had already obtained signatures on the divorce papers and alimony request documents. Seeing James and my sister like this was pathetic. My ex-husband, who had remarried my sister, had returned to his parents' home, just as I had warned. But there seemed to be constant quarrels between my sister and my in-laws. The main cause of the conflict was the lie about my sister being pregnant with my ex-husband's child. His mother, who was hoping for an heir, was extremely angry. My father-in-law, who had disliked my sister for stealing his son from me from the very beginning, hadn't even spoken to her. He fronted the alimony for James, and I was paid in full. But my sister, seeing this, pleaded with him, Dad, could you please pay my alimony as well? To this, the father-in-law responded, I have no reason to be called Dad by you. He was fuming. Not being able to obtain anything she had hoped for, my sister ran away from my ex-husband's family home without a word and went missing. She had practically remarried the ex-husband just to bear the burden of alimony, which was utterly foolish. My ex-husband seemed to consider getting back with me, but his father scolded him. "You're the kind of man who should never even think about having a family. You can't even take care of yourself properly." I wouldn't get back with my ex-husband even if he begged me. I had stopped believing in him when he cheated on me with my sister and was disgusted by his indifferent attitude during our discussions. He was dismissed from his executive position and is now working as a temporary employee. I've continued being the CEO, which is the core of my life. I don't even think about remarrying someone after the breakup. I've kept in touch with my father-in-law, receiving advice when needed. For now, I want to focus on the company, thinking of it as being married to it for the sake of my employees.
My idea is for my son to marry her. Can you have kids? That's why I wasn't keen on him marrying someone older like you, my mother-in-law said with a smile. Beside her sat a younger woman, and my husband, the most important person, remained silent next to her. I'm so tired of dealing with his family. I stormed out in anger, but quickly wished I hadn't and wanted to make things right. I feel really bad about marrying into this family. My name is Olivia, and I'm 38 years old. I met my husband, Sam, who was 8 years younger, through a friend. I was unsure about dating him because of the age gap, but he said, "Age doesn't matter. I love you, Olivia." And we started dating, then got married. About 6 months into our relationship, he decided it was time for me to meet his parents because we were thinking about getting married. His mom didn't like the idea because of our age difference. She said to Sam in front of me, "I thought you'd bring home a young, pretty bride when you talked about introducing the woman you might marry." Oh dear, Olivia is 38. Sam, I mean no offense, but think about it again. Younger women are better. His dad stepped in and said, "If Sam thinks it's right, then it's right, isn't it? Sorry for my wife's rude comments, Olivia." After that, they agreed to our marriage. My father-in-law was someone who would calm down my mother-in-law's mean words, seeming like he didn't like arguments. But after we got married, he often ignored things that were wrong, which was disappointing. Sam's family was famous for owning a lot of land in our small town, and my mother-in-law bragged about it a lot. Even though she wasn't actually related by blood, she married into the family, just like me. This family is wealthy, and Sam, as their favorite, has a charming personality that's almost like a dream. The guy I dated before Sam was really careful with money, which was hard, so I like how Sam is generous and relaxed about it. Even though my mother-in-law reluctantly accepted our marriage after my father-in-law scolded her, she doesn't seem happy about it. She keeps telling me how a good wife should act, which is annoying. She's influential among the local women and is proud of leading the Women's Association and being popular. She insisted I meet the association members on a weekday to make a good impression on them. She introduced me with a proud smile, but some of them whispered, "You'll face challenges too," suggesting she wasn't as popular as she claimed. "Oh, and I was also advised to have a fertility checkup," she added. I felt a bit uneasy that it was my mother-in-law, not Sam, who suggested it, but I was curious too, so I agreed. The exams weren't pleasant, but I wish there was a way to make them easier. Sitting in that examination chair felt like torture. Despite the discomfort, the results of my checkup were good, and I felt relieved when the doctor said, "You're healthy." Sam seemed worried, but he relaxed when I told him the news. I shared the results with my mother-in-law, hoping we could now enjoy our marriage without worries. Then she said, "Great, you've cleared the first hurdle." First hurdle? What does she mean by that? I thought she'd be happier. Was she hoping for a bad result? I was unsure how to react when my mother-in-law made an unexpected suggestion. "Once you're married, let's buy a duplex and live together. You'll need to chip in for the down payment and mortgage. You work in administration, right? Your salary might not be high, but you should manage considering your age and experience. I'll cover the rest of the costs for the duplex." I was taken aback by this sudden proposal. I glanced at my husband beside me, but he remained silent. "Please help me out." "Well, about living together, Sam hasn't mentioned anything to me," I replied. Besides feeling insulted about my job being belittled, I was more concerned about the duplex and living arrangements. You haven't heard? Oh, Sam probably thought it was understood. That's not good. We always planned that when Sam got married, we'd all live together. I felt a shiver run down my spine. Was she implying she influenced Sam into this idea through repetition? Yes, that's what I had in mind, she confirmed. What? I never heard about this. Why are you agreeing so easily? I'm sorry, but I didn't know about this plan, and I can't make a decision without discussing it with Sam. So can we hold off on this for now? With that, I left my in-laws' house. Later, when I asked Sam about it, he explained that he had planned to build a duplex on his parents' land after we got married and live with them. I was upset that he hadn't mentioned this to me earlier, but he just said, sorry, I forgot. Looking back, I realized I should have reconsidered marrying him. At that time, Sam seemed kind and attractive, and I was worried that at my age, I wouldn't find someone else if I let him go. I regret now that I was charmed by his apology and didn't think more clearly. It seems I got caught up in the idea of marriage and didn't see things clearly. So I ended up agreeing to build the duplex my mother-in-law wanted, and I ended up paying for half of the down payment and mortgage. 6 months after we got married, I found out I was pregnant. To be safe, I didn't tell my in-laws until things seemed stable. I was worried something might go wrong. Once everything was okay, I told them the good news. They were thrilled and started talking about baby names right away. They were hoping for a boy, but we didn't know the gender yet, so it's still a surprise. There's some pressure, but it feels good to make them happy. They suggested I quit my job for safety, but since I help out with my family's business, I have a flexible role. I chose to keep working as long as I felt okay. My pregnancy was going well, and I began to feel the baby moving inside me, a moment filled with both mystery and joy. I'm grateful for the experience of being a woman and feeling this happiness. Every time I go for a checkup, my husband Sam and my in-laws eagerly await news of the baby's progress, and I'm excitedly anticipating the birth. I believe having this child will strengthen my relationship with my mother-in-law. One day, amidst what seemed like a bright and ordinary day, I noticed that the baby's movements were becoming weaker. An indescribable anxiety engulfed me, and I rushed to the hospital. The doctors delivered devastating news. Something was wrong with the baby. How? Why? I was living my life normally. What had I done wrong? Fears of the unknown gripped me as I was admitted to the hospital immediately. Despite the doctor's efforts, my child's journey ended too soon. Just a few more months, and I could have held my baby. Why did it happen so suddenly? It felt like just yesterday when the baby was lively inside me. Was it my fault? As tears streamed down my face, my husband's words cut through the grief. How long will you cry? It's done now, isn't it? Crying won't bring the baby back. Stop crying. I was stunned. What was he saying? Our child had just passed away. Although taken aback by this unfamiliar coldness from Sam, my shattered state of mind left me unable to respond. The day I was discharged from the hospital arrived, but Sam didn't come to pick me up. Putting on a brave face, I reassured the concerned nurses that I'd manage fine on my own. Arriving home in a taxi, I was met by Sam, my mother-in-law, and a stranger. Welcome back. It's unfortunate, isn't it? My mother-in-law said with an odd smile. Yes, I replied, taking a seat on the living room couch as directed. The seating arrangement felt strange, with my mother-in-law and the stranger sitting across from me, and Sam beside them, showing no signs of comfort or eye contact. Then my mother-in-law spoke up. We've discussed this with Sam. Since you can't have children anymore, we don't need a daughter-in-law who can't provide in here, so we've arranged for this girl to marry Sam. I was stunned by her words. As I struggled to come to terms with the loss of the baby, tears brimmed in my eyes. But I fought back, knowing that giving in to tears would mean admitting defeat. Unable to lift my gaze, I kept my head bowed. Despite my despair, my mother-in-law pressed on mercilessly. Well, if you're suggesting you'll support the family financially instead of having children, we might consider letting you stay. But can you really provide for us if they leave you behind? I was bewildered by their conversation. Instinctively, I looked to my husband for support, but he avoided my eyes. Beside him, a woman who looked triumphant stared back at me. I recognized her as Sam's childhood friend, introduced to me at our wedding. Seeing my husband's reluctance to meet my gaze, I realized he wasn't on my side. A chilling realization washed over me, sharpening my senses. While I was in the hospital, it seems they made their plans. They want to kick me out, the woman who can't have children, and bring in a younger wife to have in here. If I stay, I'll only suffer more. There's nothing for me here anymore. Finally understanding this clearly, I said to Sam, I get it. Let's divorce. Please be happy with your new wife. And so I left the house and went back to my family home. My parents were surprised but welcomed me warmly. They knew about my miscarriage and were outraged by the cruelty I faced so soon after leaving the hospital. It was a relief to feel their love after so long, and I ended up crying a lot that day. Exhausted from crying, I fell asleep. But the next day, my mother-in-law and husband, who had treated me so cruelly, showed up at my family home. At first, my mother answered the door, but when she realized who it was, she refused to talk to them. Then they started ringing the doorbell nonstop, shouting, "We take back the divorce. Come back now." In truth, my family owns a barbecue restaurant, a well-known spot that serves a globally recognized brand of beer. Many famous people, including celebrities and athletes, dine there. However, my husband's family comes from an old and respected background. They had a negative opinion of my family because of our restaurant business. They held on to old-fashioned beliefs that restaurants were shady and that our family background was lacking. We had invited them to dine with us before the wedding, but they declined, citing concerns about beef and preferring to eat at specific places. During the pre-wedding discussions, they indirectly criticized my family, making remarks like, "Oh, you're in the restaurant business, aren't you? That's from your parents' era, isn't it? Oh, I understand. Dealing with beef, huh?" Reputable families usually avoid such ventures. It hurt to see my parents, who had worked hard to raise me, being belittled in this way. My parents brushed it off with a chuckle, saying, "Some people just think that way." On the day I left after the divorce, my husband and mother-in-law happened to catch a TV feature about our restaurant. Until then, they hadn't shown any interest and had looked down on my family. But when they learned that the restaurant was described as running its own farm, producing top-quality beef, and enjoying immense popularity with meat exported worldwide, their attitude changed. Suddenly, they were panicking and came rushing to me, pleading for my return. They tried to cozy up to me, saying, "If we'd known you were so successful, we wouldn't have talked about divorce. We're sorry for yesterday. We weren't thinking straight. Please come back." It made me feel sick to my stomach how quickly they changed their tune. After all the discussions about children and heirs, was it really just about money in the end? My husband, Sam, and his family never bothered to inquire about my job in detail. So I had casually mentioned that I worked in office administration for my family's business, leading them to believe I was a low-paid, unimportant employee. It seems they assumed that if they asked me to contribute to the house's down payment and mortgage, I'd give up on the marriage. The truth is, I actually oversee the meat export division of my parents' company, earning a substantial income for an office worker. Thankfully, I had saved up a good amount of money due to marrying later in life, which allowed me to meet their financial demands. I'm also a major shareholder in the company and aspire to take over my father's position to further expand the business. They never showed any interest or asked me about this until they saw it on TV, which suddenly changed their attitude towards me. Despite incessantly talking about wanting children, it seems money was their primary concern all along. I'm utterly disappointed by their superficiality. After silently observing the situation, my father finally lost his temper and kicked Sam and his parents out. "Thank you, Dad. You saved me," I said gratefully. Still simmering with anger, my father began drinking and cursing at them. He wanted me to explain everything that happened before the marriage, holding nothing back, believing I shouldn't handle this alone. My father immediately contacted a lawyer he knew, seeking damages for my unjust eviction. We also demanded reimbursement for the housing funds I provided during our time living together. The claim was acknowledged, and I was awarded a refund for the expenses I covered. However, Sam alone couldn't repay the loan I had taken out, so they had to sell their family home. Despite being a luxurious house on rural property, it still had a substantial mortgage remaining even after the sale. Moreover, the house was filled with Sam's mother's eccentricities, making finding a buyer willing to accept it as is difficult, which could delay the sale. Luckily, they were able to sell some of their separately owned land, allowing me to recoup my money first, which was a relief. At this point, I was grateful to have married into a landlord's family. Sam and his parents were forced to leave their beloved two-family home and now seemed to be struggling in a rented apartment, trying to repay their loan. Oh, and as for the woman who was considering marrying Sam, she was only interested because she thought she'd live in a big house and that his family was wealthy. But as soon as she found out they were going to lose the house and still be in debt, she disappeared. I think it was smart of her to run away because if she had married him, she might have been pressured to have a child and maybe even forced to work because of her young age. This area is still pretty rural, so news spreads quickly. Gossip flies around, especially when it involves a well-known family like Sam's. People are talking, saying things like they treated her horribly and drove her away. They used to flaunt their big house, but now they're in debt and living in an apartment. Both the wife and the potential new wife have left them. Their family line might end with this generation. It's surprising how accurate the rumors are and makes you wonder who's been watching all this unfold. The power of a rural network is something else. It seems like my controlling mother-in-law, who used to act like she owned the place, is now sneaking around even when she's just out shopping, worried about what people will say. My parents reminded me, "We warned you about marrying into a family that would demand pregnancy tests before marriage, didn't we?" And brushed off the situation. They tried to console me in their own way, saying, "Olivia just rushed into marriage a bit. Don't worry about it. It's okay if you stay home for now." They show their care in their own unique way. Despite the challenges we faced, like being evicted and going to court, I can sense their happiness at having their daughter back home. I'm grateful for their warmth and support. It feels like I've woken up from a bad dream about my married life, and now I'm free. Although I have a divorce behind me, I'm still in my 30s and haven't given up on marriage. Once things settle down, I plan to focus on finding a new partner. But for now, maybe I should dedicate more time to doing good things for my parents. The reservation is set for 7 people. This individual will have a separate seat, please. That cheerful voice belonged to my mother-in-law, who always finds joy in teasing me. But today, everything changes. Armed with a secret, I've decided it's time to reveal all to our relatives. My name is Emily. I'm 28 and work as a chef. I met my husband, Chris, at a popular restaurant where I worked after culinary school. Chris manages his family's electronics store, a business passed down for 3 generations. After his father's passing last year, Chris became the 3rd generation owner. I come from a simple family, but cooking runs in our blood. My parents and older brother are all chefs, and I've been cooking since childhood. With talent and hard work, I graduated top of my class. Cooking has always been my passion, but things changed after marrying Chris. Right after we tied the knot, I moved in with my mother-in-law. Chris had always lived at home, and with his father's recent passing, he felt it was necessary for me to be there to support his mother. I had imagined our married life eagerly, knowing that eventually, as the eldest son, we would reside with his mother. However, I hadn't anticipated it happening so soon. Maybe I should have expressed my concerns before marriage, but given the circumstances, I didn't want to seem difficult. Nonetheless, what's done is done. However, when we initially moved in together, my mother-in-law was incredibly kind. She would bring me cream puffs from my favorite bakery and insisted on taking care of most household chores. Reasoning that I was working, she handled all the cooking, but I struggled with the taste. It seemed her dishes were always too intense for my palate. I later learned she hailed from the southern part of the country, where people supposedly prefer salty foods. However, not everyone from the South shares this taste preference. Some of my southern co-workers actually preferred milder flavors. Regardless, my mother-in-law's cooking went beyond salty. Her stews were so dark, I couldn't discern the ingredients, and they tasted like concentrated barbecue sauce. She would insist I have more, claiming it complemented bread well. When I voiced my struggle with the saltiness, Chris would ask if she had toned it down, to which she would reply with uncertainty, adjusting the seasoning based on my feedback. It left me feeling uneasy. We carried on like this for a while, but my work started to suffer. Constantly eating my mother-in-law's meals seemed to numb my taste buds, making it hard for me to discern flavors. Thankfully, the head chef always checked my dishes before service, sparing me any reprimands. Realizing this couldn't continue, I began waking up earlier than my mother-in-law, especially for breakfast, which seemed to alleviate some of my struggles at work. Oddly, her demeanor toward me grew colder. She started ignoring my greetings and even criticized my cooking. "Emily, this lacks flavor. You need to season it properly. Just because you're busy, what's your excuse?" "But mother-in-law, I've seasoned it as per the recipe. Please taste it." She did, only to respond, "It's still bland. Can't you tell?" Adding more would be unhealthy. What's wrong with enjoying good food? Don't let your skills go to waste. With that, she poured an excessive amount of soy sauce over my dish. "I'm concerned about our health." I protested, but she brushed it off. I had a hunch about what triggered my mother-in-law's sudden change in behavior. It stemmed from an incident at my niece's birthday party hosted at our home. My husband has 2 sisters, both married and living separately. Despite our limited interactions, they've always been kind, even offering to intervene if I faced any issues with my mother-in-law. Their husbands are also pleasant individuals. During the party, which celebrated my older sister-in-law's daughter turning 5, I assisted my mother-in-law in the kitchen. The dining table boasted an array of dishes, each clearly labeled with its creator. As the festivities commenced, my sister-in-law remarked, "Our daughter adores the omelette rice from Emily's restaurant. Having it here today is a treat." "I actually make the omelettes at work," I responded, prompting praise from the birthday girl herself. "The omelette lady's food is yummy." These exchanges didn't sit well with my mother-in-law. Desperate to redirect attention, she insisted, "Look, Grandma's stew is also tasty." But her granddaughter rejected it, complaining, "It hurts my mouth." While my sister's husbands politely sampled her cooking, it quickly requested more water, noting the excessive saltiness. My sister-in-law jokingly suggested I give her cooking lessons, which only fueled my mother-in-law's anger. She stormed out of the room, refusing to return. I regretted agreeing to cook for the party, but my mother-in-law had requested it, leaving me no choice. The tense atmosphere led to an early end to the celebration. While my sister-in-law's comment was meant in jest, criticism of one's cooking stings. It likely hurt my mother-in-law, who had prepared the food with hopes of delighting everyone. That night, I apologized to her, acknowledging any overstepping. Her response was cold, "Don't get too comfortable. You're just a freeloader." The next morning marked the beginning of relentless bullying from my mother-in-law. She would season the breakfast I prepared without even tasting it. If it didn't meet her standards, she disposed of it in front of me. Seeking solace, I turned to my husband, Chris. His response was dismissive, suggesting I was overreacting and should have obeyed his mother. He also started coming home later, using work as an excuse, even skipping his niece's birthday party. This behavior shattered any illusions I had about the kind of man he was, despite us being married for only 6 months. Our marriage was crumbling, and the thought of divorce crossed my mind. However, with just 6 months of marriage under our belt, I hesitated, knowing it would upset our parents. Then things took a turn for the worse. My mother-in-law slipped on the stairs, injuring her leg. Despite offers from my sister-in-law to assist, my mother-in-law insisted on my help, stating, "You're technically the wife, so you should at least do this much. It's absurd to rely on my daughter." From then on, I was at my mother-in-law's beck and call, even for trivial tasks. She began contacting me during work hours, forcing me to request time off repeatedly. Although my co-workers assured me it was fine, I felt guilty and eventually resigned from my job. It seemed my mother-in-law had been waiting for this moment, mocking me. "Can't handle your prestigious job anymore, can you?" How pathetic! Suddenly, day and night, my mother-in-law summoned me incessantly, leaving me no time to rest. Whenever I attempted to discuss things with Chris, he was increasingly absent, claiming to sleep at his office, though I doubted his words. My decision was made, but I couldn't leave without making a move, so I resolved to seek revenge. During breakfast one morning, I broached the topic. I want a divorce. They both looked shocked, dismissing my request with scorn. What nonsense! We've barely been married a year. You'll be the laughingstock. Accusing me of infidelity? Absurd. You're embarrassing us, Emily. You're way out of line. Despite their mockery, I stood firm. Chris is always absent. My mother-in-law only knows how to bully. Who'd want to endure that? I'm filing for divorce. My decision stands. My resolute stance alarmed them, prompting Chris to stutter an apology. "We're sorry. I'll try to come home earlier. You can even stay at your parents' for a while." "But my mom's injured and I have work. Can't you stay until she recovers?" Though he struggled to apologize, his sincerity was evident. "I've been immature. I'm sorry. Can't you reconsider?" I reluctantly agreed, yet their smirks betrayed their true feelings, typical of a mother and son. Following that, the bullying ceased, and Chris began returning home earlier. However, the tranquility was short-lived. Chris resumed his late returns, and my mother-in-law's mistreatment resumed. Despite her leg failing to heal, she frequently ventured out, citing hospital visits. This behavior struck me as odd, leading me to uncover a shocking truth. Days later, my phone buzzed incessantly with calls from Chris and my mother-in-law. Chris's tone was heated when I answered. "Where are you? How can you leave my mom like this?" Unfazed, I responded, "I'm at my parents' house." "What's wrong?" "You said I could go. What are you saying? My mom's leg isn't better, right?" In the background, I heard my mother-in-law causing a commotion. "Regardless, I won't return. Please communicate through a lawyer," I declared before hanging up. Following that ordeal, I relished the peaceful moments at my parents' home. They pampered me with my favorite meals, and I reciprocated by cooking for them. When my mother praised my cooking as the best, tears welled up in my eyes. A few days later, I received an unexpected call from my dreaded mother-in-law. She apologized for her past behavior and extended an invitation to her upcoming birthday party, insisting I attend. The celebration would take place at a chic restaurant near the station, renowned for its new French-trained chef and authentic cuisine. Though not obligated, I saw it as an opportunity and accepted eagerly. My mother-in-law was thrilled, emphasizing the importance of my presence and promptly sharing the details. On the day of the birthday party the following week, Chris and my mother-in-law awaited me at the restaurant entrance. As I approached, Chris wore a smirk, and my heart sank. The gathering mirrored the previous one. 2 sets of sister-in-laws with their husbands and a little girl, alongside my mother-in-law, husband, and myself, totaling 8. The impending divorce remained a secret, with instructions to disclose it after the meal. Amidst the anticipation, the sister-in-laws and their spouses arrived. "Emily, it's been too long. You look stunning as always," they greeted warmly. With everyone present, we proceeded into the restaurant. However, our party of 8 seemed to puzzle the waiter. "Is the reservation for 7 people?" "We're 8, he questioned. Before I could respond, my mother-in-law interjected loudly, "The reservation is indeed for 7. We prefer this person to be seated separately, please," pointing at me as she spoke. As I was pushed forward, confusion painted the faces of the sister-in-laws and their husbands, while Chris and my mother-in-law exchanged smirks. "Ha, so this was their plan. How amusing. Emily has a surprise, doesn't she?" My mother-in-law declared, revealing the supposed surprise at her own birthday party, much to my bewilderment. Well, if my mother-in-law enjoys surprises, then I'll gladly provide one. "Emily, is it true?" The sisters-in-law appeared concerned, prompting my response, "Yes, indeed." I had hoped to keep it under wraps, but my mother-in-law caught wind of it. "Pardon me, is there an available seat?" I inquired of the waiter, who kindly led me to a seat out of sight from my in-laws, a welcomed relief. While they enjoyed their meal, including a specially prepared kids' meal for one of the sisters-in-law's daughters, I remained out of their view. The atmosphere seemed pleasant. The young girl exclaimed joyfully, "Wow, this tastes just like my sister's omelet." Her sisters echoed similar sentiments, praising the food's deliciousness. My mother-in-law beamed with pride, boasting, "You see? Since the chef changed, the flavors have vastly improved. Wait until you try the meat dishes after this," she boasted, with my husband nodding in agreement. Then came the moment my mother-in-law had eagerly awaited, the arrival of the meat dish she had boasted about. A tantalizing plate was placed in front of my sister-in-law and her husband. However, as minutes passed, no food arrived for my mother-in-law and husband. Growing impatient, they beckoned the waiter, demanding answers. "What's the holdup?" My mother-in-law's voice boomed, the loudness seeming out of place in the elegant restaurant, prompting grimaces from nearby patrons. "The chef himself will serve your dishes. Please be patient," the waiter calmly responded, to which my mother-in-law retorted, "Oh, really? Is it because we're regulars?" Despite her tone, she didn't appear entirely displeased. "Apologies for the delay," they muttered, clearly expecting a waiter, but were met with shock when they saw who brought their dishes. Their eyes widened in disbelief as they gazed upon me, donning a chef's coat. "What? Emily, what's going on?" "Ah, so this is what a surprise feels like. Emily, you never fail to surprise us." Despite the sisters-in-law's amazement, my husband and mother-in-law wore expressions that clearly said, "This isn't what we had planned." Ignoring their reactions, I proceeded to serve the dishes without a care in the world. "I've prepared this dish especially tailored to your tastes," I announced as I placed a peculiar black lump smothered in rich soy sauce in front of my mother-in-law. With a flourish, I poured even more soy sauce onto it. She stood frozen, clearly taken aback. And for our special guest, I continued, presenting a plate adorned with an assortment of batteries, ranging from AA to D. To add an extra kick, "Please help yourself to some soy sauce," I added, setting a whole bottle in front of my husband. After all, he's always buzzing about work, I quipped, arranging the batteries for my electrician husband, even selecting the priciest ones available at other electronic stores. I anticipate some gratitude for my efforts. My nieces erupted into laughter at the sight. My sister-in-law and her husband wore expressions suggesting, "Isn't this a bit over the top?" Meanwhile, my mother-in-law and husband flushed red with embarrassment, bellowing, "You're making a mockery of us and this establishment. Get the manager." As my husband made the demand, the manager emerged, calmly stating, "That would be me." "What on earth were you thinking? We're the customers here. We'll take legal action," they threatened, to which the manager calmly responded, "Is that so? Well, in that case, we'll be pursuing legal action against you two for disrupting our business." Their response? A puzzle, huh? It became apparent that my in-laws were frequent patrons of the restaurant, often exhibiting arrogance towards the staff. They had a reputation for nitpicking, never considering the inconvenience they caused other customers. Their troublesome behavior was well known. "We've tolerated it because you're family, but it seems it's time to put some distance between us. Right, Emily?" "Absolutely, big brother." Upon hearing this revelation, my in-laws turned their surprised gazes towards us. "You see, this restaurant has been managed by my brother for quite some time now. He resides in France and couldn't make it back for our wedding due to his busy schedule." Despite sending his congratulations, my mother-in-law and my husband, Bob, had never met him. However, my brother had seen family photos and recognized both of them, I explained. "I deeply regret not being able to attend your wedding. I attempted to reach out several times, but you always seemed to have company," I continued, watching as their faces paled. The conversation grew tense. My sisters-in-law urged their husbands to leave first, then proposed, "Shall we delve into this further?" Though they smiled, their eyes betrayed a seriousness that sent a chill down my spine. It's merely business, you know. The old-timers on Main Street, they prefer these modern spots these days. Chris interjected. As he spoke, a waiter approached and handed him an earring, remarking, "You left this behind last time." Dining with men who wear earrings, quite suspicious, isn't it? My sister-in-law commented with a smirk. Unable to contain my laughter, I responded, "No, dear sister-in-law, this man has been having an affair with a woman who works at a florist near his shop." Chris's face drained of color as he glanced at me, silently questioning how I knew. Little did he know, I had hired a private investigator some time ago. My intuition had proven correct. Chris had been meeting the woman almost daily after work. This restaurant appeared to be their favorite haunt, as they visited nearly every week. The evidence, including photos of their rendezvous at a hotel, was abundant. "I'm serious about her. Marrying you was a mistake. I'm ready for a divorce," Chris declared, his stance on divorce suddenly shifting. "That works for me. I've been wanting a divorce too," I replied, seizing the opportunity. "But I'll be seeking alimony, so be prepared to pay up." "I just landed a major contract," I added. "I'll happily comply," he chuckled. "Good to hear. Now, as for you, mother-in-law." My mother-in-law, who had remained silent until then, visibly trembled. Though not as frequent a patron as Chris, she too had her own routine here. "But I'm already a widow," she protested. "That's irrelevant," I countered. Upon hearing her confession, I felt compelled to reveal another piece of information. "I had the private investigator look into you as well, mother-in-law. It seems your relationship with your partner has been ongoing for about 5 years. However, didn't father-in-law pass away just last year?" My sisters-in-law shot their mother a glare of anger. No surprises there. The two of them were always closer to our esteemed father than to our mother. Discovering the truth, they were understandably furious. I too was taken aback by the level of detail the investigator had uncovered about my mother-in-law. It was revealed that my father-in-law had also hired the same investigator. "You've been deceiving us about Dad all this time. And Chris, you're cheating on Emily. Have you both lost your minds?" The sisters-in-law's anger showed no signs of abating. Recognizing that our presence was disturbing other patrons, we agreed to disperse for the day and reconvene at the in-laws' house on another occasion. On that day, I bid farewell to my brother and the staff with spirited high fives. A few days later, in the presence of my two sisters-in-law, the divorce papers were filled out. My husband, showing no remorse, grumbled phrases like, "Well, just make sure you don't regret it, all right?" Despite my limited mobility, I ended up with such a troublesome wife. Exhausted by his endless complaints, I snapped, "Mind your step, mother-in-law." She jolted, responding with a puzzled, "What?" It was evident her leg had fully healed. Despite this, she continued to feign discomfort, solely to torment me. Her spiteful behavior confirmed her status as nothing more than a stranger to me. Thus, my brief marital journey came to an end in less than a year, and I had no regrets. Afterward, alimony payments for both my ex-husband and his mistress were deposited into my account simultaneously. While it seemed my ex-husband covered his mistress's portion too, that detail was inconsequential. Following the divorce, despite plunging into debt to fulfill his alimony obligations, my ex-husband was swiftly dumped by his newfound partner. Later, I discovered from my sister-in-law that the woman was notorious in her hometown as a homewrecker. Despite my ex-husband boasting about securing a major contract, it transpired that the restaurant was filled mostly with regular customers on the day we visited. As we exited the restaurant, following an encounter with the complaining couple, applause erupted in our wake. My brother confided in me, saying, "I heard from our other sibling that the reservation was only for 7 people, so I assumed there wasn't room for me anyway, which is why I went along with the plan." As expected, they are now prohibited from ever setting foot in the restaurant again. News of their misconduct quickly spread, resulting in the loss of their significant contract. It's a fitting consequence, I suppose. Their electronics stores seem to thrive on trust, but their future success is now uncertain. As for my mother-in-law, she too suffered repercussions. Not only was she abandoned by her partner, but her poor health led to a diagnosis revealing that her long-term dietary habits were to blame. Despite treatment, her body will never fully recover. It seems like a fitting consequence for her actions as well. As for me, I've returned to my job at the familiar Western-style restaurant. Despite the tumultuous events, my colleagues warmly embraced me back into the fold. "Welcome back, omelette lady," they greeted me with affection. My sisters-in-law remain loyal patrons of the restaurant. They severed ties with their mother and brother following the incident. They couldn't overlook the betrayal towards me, someone they had treated like a younger sister, and the deceit towards their late father. Their resolve to maintain this distance remains steadfast. Despite the challenges, my true joy lies in the kitchen. Cooking brings me unparalleled happiness, and in this moment, I find myself